Okay, pop quiz time. What do all of these men have in common? Bishop Eddie Long, Earl Polk, Jim Baker, Bill Hybels, Carl Lentz, Jimmy Swaggart, Ravi Zacharias, Jerry Falwell Jr., Jeremy Foster, John Gray, Tullian Tivigen, Billy Graham's grandson, if you do not know, and pastor of Florida Megachurch, Brian Houston, pastor of Hillsong, and more recently, Matt Chandler. All of these men have either confessed having some sort of sexual impropriety or they were accused of it, so much so that they have had to at least admit to that. And where there is smoke, there is often fire. Why is sexual immorality or sexual sin so enticing? Why is it so difficult for so many people to get victory over? And how might it negatively affect our lives? I heard a great quote and it said, if you think you can't fall into sexual sin, then you're godlier than David, stronger than Samson, and wiser than Solomon. Now, in the previous chapter, Paul dealt with a specific incident of sexual immorality, sexual incest between a man and his father's wife. In this chapter, he's going to deal with sexual immorality as a whole. And this is super, super practical, so I want you to pay close attention to this video. But before we jump into the specifics, it's important for me to lay the foundation or the background or the culture of what was going on in the city of Corinth, in the church of Corinth, so that you understand the culture in which Paul was speaking into, so you can understand the type of lifestyle, the type of things that these men and women were exposed to in the Greco-Roman culture. Because just about every form of sexual sin you could think of was prevalent and acceptable in their culture, whether it was prostitution, whether it was pedophilia, whether it was fornication, whether it was homosexuality, whether it was adultery, whether it was whatever it was acceptable in Corinth. Now, let's just take prostitution for just a moment. In the first video of this series, we talked about the fact that there was a temple called the Temple of Aphrodite, and it was located in the city of Corinth. And in this temple, it was believed that there were at least 1,000 prostitutes, or priestesses, if you will, that were hired, and prostitution was legalized. And oftentimes they would come down from the temple and they would try to entice the men that were there. And because Corinth was a port city, which means people were coming in and out all the time and it was used for trade, people would know that, okay, if I want to get down and I want to kind of get in trouble, I can go on over to Corinth because I know I can get what I want over there because they had this temple and prostitution was legalized. So just imagine that for a second, brothers. This is how you lived your life. You have been used to frequenting this temple, which, by the way, Aphrodite is the goddess of love. And it was believed that when Aphrodite, this false goddess, would look down and see these sexual acts being performed, it would entice her, and then it would cause her to have favor upon the land and cause their crops to grow. And so that is the reason why they basically did this more and more. But if just imagine this, guys, this is how you lived your life. You came out of this environment where sex was just a thing that you did. And now Paul is coming back and saying, no, you can't do that. You have to abstain. This was the culture in which he was speaking. Now, here's a few more things that you need to know about the idea of sexuality in the Greco-Roman culture. Well, number one, ancient Greeks actually believed that homosexuality was the purest and highest form of love. So this was how warped their thinking was with regard to sex. As a matter of fact, many of the well-known philosophers like Socrates and Plato were gay. If you read some of their writings, this will become very, very clear. And this was a known fact. As a matter of fact, 14 out of the first 15 Roman emperors were gay. And the most common form of homosexuality was what was called pederasty, which is the idea of an older man being involved with an underaged man. This was the culture in which Paul was addressing this issue in chapter 6. And so if you think it's an issue now in our culture, it was what we have today was nothing compared to the way it was back then. So this brings up the question, why is sexual sin so dangerous? I mean, at the end of the day, what is the big deal? How can it actually affect my life? Well, the first thing that Paul says here is that it's just not profitable. Now, what he's going to do is he's going to take some well-known slogans from the Corinthian culture, and he's going to basically try to rebuke those or try to show them the error in that type of thinking. And one of the things that the Corinthians would say is, I'm allowed to do anything. So notice he says, you say, I am allowed to do anything. And so he's saying, you know what? Some people in Corinth were saying, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm not under the law anymore. I'm under grace. I can do anything. Or they might be saying, this is legal. It's not a criminal act to do this, right? Because prostitution is legalized. So he's saying basically, first and foremost, that sexual sin starts with a thought. I am allowed to do this. This isn't a sin. This isn't the worst sin. Or the enemy will plant these thoughts where, hey, you know what? Other people are doing it, so can I. Or you know what? We're not going all the way. We're just kind of going up to the edge. And so therefore I can get away with this. Or you know what? I'm with this person that I love, and therefore it's not going to hurt anybody. Whatever it is, sexual sin always starts with a thought. And it did with them. I am allowed to do this. But Paul says, no. Okay, even though you can physically do it, and yeah, it might be legal to do it. You're not going to go to jail for doing it. But he says, everything is not good for you. It's not profitable for you, right? So in business, they always encourage you to put together a profit loss sheet. So this is what we're going to do for sex. And I want you to think about this, if this was a business deal, would you go through with this, considering this, okay? So on the profit side, we have, a few seconds of pleasure, or a few minutes of pleasure, or a few hours of pleasure, whatever you want to say, but that's on the profit side, right? So okay, yeah, that's fun, but I don't think there's too many more profit. Let's go to the loss side and see what you could lose. First of all, you can have an unwanted pregnancy, which is going to slow your life down, which might cause you to pay child support for a long period of time, or you might be connected to somebody that you don't want to be connected to for the rest of your life because you just had a short-term pleasure and now you got a long-term consequence, even though you know you love that child. But it's an unwanted pregnancy. Now, another thing is you could get an STD. You might even get one that you can't get rid of, or something that's going to cause you to die, right? Here's another one, loss of reputation. Think about all the names that I mentioned before, Jimmy Swaggart, Ravi Zacharias, Bill Hybels, all these highly respected people who fell because of sexual sin. Now their reputation and even their ministries are tainted because of a few moments of weakness. Here's another one, Christian witness. When people know that you're doing the same things that they're doing, they're not going to listen to you because they're thinking, why should I be a Christian when you're out doing the same thing that I'm doing? Here's another one, your relationship with God. When you try to worship, when you try to pray, when you try to serve God, when you try to do all these things, and you're trying to connect with God, but your conscience is so filled with guilt and shame and all these different things, and it's cluttered because you can't really think clear because you feel so guilty before God, it hinders your ability to connect with God. Not only that, guilt and shame, right? You don't want to share these things with anybody else. You feel like your self-esteem is not where it needs to be. You might feel like damaged goods if you're a woman, and who's going to love me if they really knew the things that I've done, all this and that. Not only that, future comparisons. Why would you want to be married one day and start to compare your spouse with somebody that you used to be with? Why would you want to have that thought enter your brain? No, you want to enjoy the blessing that God has for you in your marriage. Blurred vision. Listen, sometimes you can be in a bad relationship and you can think that it's good. Why? Because the sex is good. Because this person is making you feel a certain way and you can't even see that you need to get out of this relationship because your vision is so blurred because you've been so overwhelmed by the passion of it all. Now, a last one is it's a gateway to other sins. Do you think that the enemy is content with you just having sex? No. He wants to take you down the road where you're looking at different things online, or you're maybe doing threesomes, or you're doing whatever it is, because sexual immorality is just a gateway to other sins. So the first thing that Paul says, as terms of how it can damage you, is that it is not profitable. But the second thing that he says is that it enslaves. It enslaves. He says, and even though I am allowed to do anything, he says, even though y'all keep saying I'm allowed to do it, Paul said, I must not become a slave to anything. And so the idea here is sexual sin has the ability to enslave us in ways that no other sin can. You do it, you want more of it, you get addicted to it, it becomes a stronghold in your life. You can't seem to shake it, you can't seem to get away with it, get away from it. Why? Because sexual sin preys upon a natural desire that we have. God created all of us to be sexual beings. But what the enemy does is he takes a natural godly desire and he wants you to settle for the counterfeit of it. So it can enslave us. Notice what Paul says here. You say, now he's picking up on another slogan that they used, food was made for the stomach and the stomach for food. So this is funny to me. So the Corinthians were basically saying, hey, food is for the stomach and the stomach is for food, right? So in other words, they were basically trying to draw a connection between eating and having sex. They were like, well, if I'm hungry, I don't deprive myself of eating because if I'm hungry, that's my body's way of telling me that I need to eat. And so when I'm hungry, I eat. Why? Because my stomach was given to me, created for me to put food in it, right? And they were saying, well, sex is the same way, right? When I'm horny, that means I need to go and have sex because my body is telling me that it wants something. And so just like when I get hungry for food, I shouldn't deprive myself. If I got hungry for sex, I shouldn't deprive myself. It's no big deal. It's just like eating. And Paul says, no, that is true. The food was made for the stomach and the stomach is for food, though someday God will do away with both of them. And then Paul says this, but you can't say that our bodies were made for sexual immorality. They were made for the Lord and the Lord cares about our bodies. So he says, no, that's where your saying breaks down because he says, God did not just create your body for sex, right? That's not the only purpose of it. He said, I created your body for something more, something greater, not just for sex. The third thing that we see, how sex can really destroy our lives, is that it connects. It says here, anyone who joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her. For the scriptures say the two are united into one. You know, this Greek word here for joins actually means glue. So I want you to visualize this. I want you to think about what would happen if you took two pieces of paper and you glued them together and you just let it sit for about a day or two. You came back a day later and you tried to take those two pieces of paper apart and rip them apart. What's going to happen? One of these papers is going to take part of the other paper with it. Why? Because they're glued together. This is why it's so damaging to have sex outside of your marriage, because it joins you. It glues you together in the same way that a husband and wife are supposed to be glued and joined together because of the gift of sex that God has given to every married couple. In the same way, sex outside of marriage can join you with somebody that's not your spouse. This is the reason why we can have these soul ties. This is the reason why somebody can call you a year, 2 years later, somebody you haven't even been with in a while, and something in you starts to have a feeling for them. Something in you doesn't want to get rid of their phone number in your phone. Something in you can have them call you a year later, and you're just ready to go back out with them. Why? Because you've given your part of yourself to this particular person, and they've given a part of themselves to you as well. And so there is a tie that needs to be broken. It can connect. But the fourth thing that he says is that it damages. It damages your body. He says, no other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Now, what are some ways that it can hurt us? Well, first of all, mental and emotional. I've already mentioned some ways, right? But it affects your mind and it affects your heart and your soul. Not only that, it can affect your body physically. There are physical effects that your body can experience, like things like STDs, all sorts of things that can happen to your body. But not only that, a spiritual effect, as I talked about before. Sex outside of marriage can have this negative effect. So what's Paul's only solution here? He says it, run from sexual sin. Just run. Run, Forrest, run. See, many of us get in trouble because we put confidence in our flesh. We think that we're stronger than we actually are. And as a result, We think we can do some things, and we can go up to the line and kind of do stuff, and it's not going to hurt us. Paul said, no, don't do that. Instead of asking the question, how close can I get to sin? Ask the question, how far away from the line can I stay? Because the closer you get to it, the more you're going to want to yield. He says you need to run. As a matter of fact, this Greek word run or flee is actually the Greek word fuego, from which we get our English word for fugitive. What's a fugitive do? A fugitive is running. He's trying to get away, right? He says that's the same way we need to treat sexual sin. Continuing on, he says, no other sin, once again, so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Here it is. Don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? Listen, every time you and I engage in sex outside of marriage, I'm going to say you because I ain't doing that, right? But every time you might be doing that, we are taking the Holy Spirit with us and forcing him to go through something that he does not want to go through. We're forcing him to be joined together with somebody who's not our spouse. And he says, you do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. If you're a Christian, Jesus didn't die on the cross for you to go and give yourself to someone else. No, he paid a high price for you on the cross. The least we can do is offer our bodies as a living sacrifice to him. So my friend, you might be watching this and this video really hit you hard because you're saying, Brother Parr, I know I've fallen. I know I've failed. I know I've slipped up. I know I've made mistakes. Well, listen, there's nothing you can do about your past right now. Don't live in condemnation. Don't live in defeat. Don't go feeling sorry for yourself. The only thing that matters right now is what you do from this point forward. Don't move back into the past and sink into a deep sea of depression. Just say, you know what, God, I failed. I've confessed my sin before you. I repent, but now moving forward on this day, I'm going to get on the right path and I'm going to save myself from marriage. Speaking of marriage, that's what the next video is about. You do not want to miss it. It's the next video in this series, Church Gone Wild, a modern day look at the wildest church ever. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and share it with a friend. Hit the like button if you found it helpful. If you've not subscribed to the channel, listen, what are you waiting for? Subscribe and turn on all those notifications so that you can receive a notification in the app when the next video drops. All right. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.